5 years from now, what's the world going to look like? I always challenge people to look backwards. 5 years ago, could you have possibly predicted anything that's going on in your life right now with any degree of certainty? Inevitably, it's almost like, no, I would have been totally wrong. I could not have predicted where I'd be sitting today, what I'd be doing today, where I'd be living today, what companies I'd be working with, none of those things. If you invest too much into saying, I have everything I need to know right now to predict what's going to happen years from now, you're probably deluding yourself.
It's Slackers, unscripted business insight from two lifelong builders. Jaime and Jonathan are here to show you how big ideas travel across industries. Consider it your weekly companion on the path to better work and a better way of working.
Today, we are talking about the myth of predictability. We're talking about the fact that nobody knows anything, which is a reference to Hollywood screenwriter William Goldman, who famously said, nobody knows anything about Hollywood. And William Goldman, he was an Oscar-winning screenwriter. He wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He wrote All the President's Men. And I think the underlying point he was trying to make is that it's nearly impossible to plan or predict how to engineer a hit, how to make something that's just going to be a home run, a slam dunk, no matter what, just with a playbook that's been used somewhere else before in the past. So I guess maybe for starters, from your point of view, man, like why do you think the phrase nobody knows anything even stands the test of time?
It's an interesting one. I actually think about this a lot because, everything's so fast paced. Things change constantly. We move around, we change jobs, our families move, people come and go in our lives. Technology is constantly bending upwards. And it's increasingly difficult to have any kind of a projection of like what is going to happen just based on what's happened before. Right. I think that's the key part of that is like, if you just look to the past, that won't be enough to tell you what might happen in the future. Like there's so many more moving parts that we have to pay attention to that if we're going to try to produce something meaningful, we can't just run the playbook that produced it last time.
It certainly feels like you and I bump into this a lot by virtue of, working in tech, working in industries where sometimes I think there's a tendency for people who don't swim in the same lanes that we swim in all the time to look to folks like us and go, hey man, what's next? Like what's coming next? Like what's your crystal ball? Like, what's that say about what it's going to be, in the next 3 years, 5 years, whatever that might be. I mean, why do you think, one, I guess, is that true? Do you think people like you and I bump into that more often than others? And if we do, why is that?
Yeah, I'm almost certain we do. And partly because a big part of our job is trying to understand what the next hot thing is going to be or what innovation is going to unlock something special. We're paying attention to that. And certainly for those of us who, craft roadmaps and product definitions and talk to customers and trying to put big ideas on a whiteboard and all these other things, there's an expectation that we have some magic formula about what may or may not happen in the future. So I do think it's reasonable that people would ask us that question because it's literally, we sit down in the morning and you start thinking about these things probably more than most people do. The part that I always look at is if you're really intellectually honest with yourself, and whether it's a year or 2 years or 5 years or whatever the time may be, instead of looking forward and trying to say, 5 years from now, what's the world going to look like? I always challenge people to look backwards in the sense of 5 years ago, could you have possibly predicted anything that's going on in your life right now with any degree of certainty? Inevitably, it's almost like, no, I would have been totally wrong. Even if I knew all the things I knew 5 years ago as somebody who's got a good, finger on the pulse of stuff, I could not have predicted where I'd be sitting today, what I'd be doing today, where I'd be living today, what companies I'd be working with, none of those things. If you invest too much into saying, I have everything I need to know right now to predict what's going to happen years from now, you're probably deluding yourself.
There is a long track record, a long history of hits, of things that have been, I guess by whatever kind of standard definition you want to use for a hit, emerging out of nowhere. That almost every hit is kind of a surprise hit. That you can spend a boatload of money on a movie and have it flop. And suddenly this thing over here just pops for no particular reason. Or at least, a reason that isn't immediately visible on the surface. So I think a lot about people who are going to work, trying to do creative work, trying to build things, bring new ideas to the world, bring products, services, all that sort of stuff. And it makes sense to want to spend time thinking about, well, what's come before? What can I learn from what somebody has done before? But I think there's a trap in there to some degree around thinking that you can totally reverse engineer a hit based on just what you may have seen before, when you can't deny how you can have all the right data, all the best people around the table, and you still kind of need a little bit of luck. So it just makes me think of, like, between you and me, is there something you can think of, or a time when you were like absolutely certain that something was going to work and it didn't work?
Sadly, in my career, I probably can think of a lot of those things. I think there's a couple pieces to that. One of those is reverse engineering a hit, in a sense, is you're looking very closely at the product, whatever the product might be. It could be a movie or a song or a piece of software, whatever it might be. You're looking at that and saying, if I reverse engineer that thing, I can make another thing that would be successful. And a lot of the part that gets kind of left out of that exercise, which happens all the time in buildings all over the country, people are sitting around doing that exact thing. How do I do the thing that looked like a hit 6 months ago, a year ago, whatever it might be? One of the pieces I think people miss the most, what did that tickle with respect to society at large or customers that made it a hit? Not necessarily like what about the product was so exciting, but like, how did people receive it in such a way that made them excited, right? Like there was a time, 10, 15 years ago where it was like, oh, cheap horror movies are the path to success in the movie industry. And it's like, no, just because a cheap horror movie was successful, it wasn't successful because it was a cheap horror movie. It was actually a really good movie that didn't cost a lot to make, that resonated perfectly with an audience who hadn't gotten one of those maybe in a really long time. And it filled a void. And I think about, like on the tech side of things, one of the companies that, I've been with and I'm involved with for a very long time is a company called First Orion, who provides call protection on mobile phones. And we had all the data in the world to suggest that, people were getting scam calls on their phones, especially their mobile phones, in ways that nobody had ever seen before. That this was something that had moved from our landlines to our mobile phones, and it was happening super fast. And people were increasingly likely to get scammed because they didn't expect it to happen. And it was creating all of these problems from a customer perspective that were all of a sudden brand new problems they'd never experienced before. However, the industry at large had not perceived that as a problem yet. So we listened to the customers. We solved the customer problem. We took it to market. The product worked. And yet the industry was still like, I'm not sure if this is even a problem that we need to go talk about. And so the people that needed to be aware of it were not being made aware of it in the ways that they might traditionally have that happen. And then we did capture that magic moment, which was, we need a better way to talk about this. And we need, certain people to talk about it. And this was at a moment where we were pitching more than half of the calls you get on your mobile phone in the next year are going to be scam calls. And that's the way the industry is trending. And we're the only people to solve this problem. And pitching that out to the media, Jimmy Kimmel's people picked up on it, wrote it into his monologue. And he talked about how, hey, did you hear this thing? More than half the calls that are going to be on our cell phones in the next year are going to be scam calls. And then, making a good joke about it and having the audience react to that, and having the media be like, well, wait a minute. This is a public problem that we need to be aware of. Like, we're going to go talk about this. And then next thing you know, you've got T-Mobile and AT&T and Verizon and all the players in the industry going, we have to fix this. This is a real problem that people have. And yet it took a little bit of magic at the home stretch there to unlock that, where many people give up right before that happens. And then they end up being like, yeah, we did all the stuff, but we didn't hit the home run. We didn't get the win. And now it's, do we push on or do we give up?
Well, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, right? Because some of that is just the things that are truly out of your control as a creator or a builder that'll never be in your control. And that's part of what you're signing up for, right? Like, by virtue of just deciding to go be somebody who makes things or brings things into the world, is market conditions will change dramatically for a variety of reasons. And it's probably pretty foolhardy to think that there's a lot of valuable time spent just trying to predict that, meaning like predict the behaviors or the desires of the marketplace, like in the future. Where I think I would argue, like, some of those magic moments, maybe you up the odds of those things happening, or the likelihood of those Kimmel moments like happening, if you embrace as an individual or a team the importance of just listening, like of just being receptive to what the marketplace in and around whatever area you're spending time in is actually doing or saying, to sit right alongside your own kind of predictions or vision for the future. And the reason I'm saying that, where my head goes is like, imagine being at an age where you were going around trying to convince people to use email. Like if you were an email provider and you're having to go around and you're trying, and you're like, I can see the future clear as day. Like it's going to be huge. Everybody's going to be using this. I know we all have fax machines. And I know we all have like telephones, but honestly, this email thing, that's going to be like the way that it is. And I mean, I remember like my grandfather had like an email address. He had a CompuServe email address, and he thought it was the greatest thing to send to us like an email. And we would be like, oh, we got an email from grandpa. Let's go like check out this thing. And it's not hard in hindsight to understand the value of being able to communicate, using email. But at the time, if that was your job, was to go around and try to convince the marketplace to care about using email software, or, convince people the value of that, that was probably a pretty tough job to do. So I imagine the only thing that probably worked if you talk to any of those folks is like, well, we just kept showing up. We kept showing up with this story over and over and over again, because that was the only thing we could control, was how willing are we, as somebody who can see a vision of the future that we believe in, that we're trying to build towards, how willing are we to just keep showing up and keep taking swings and keep trying to tell the story? You kind of just have to commit to continuing to show up over and over and over again.
I think there's a combination of certainly persistence and maybe a combination of that with like a passion to do it. It's funny that you talk about, we talk about email as being like a thing. And early in my career, I ran into several of those things, given kind of where I was breaking when I was, first starting in the workplace. I was a product owner for the very first MP3 player ever, right? And here we are saying, okay, we've got a nation of college students that are swapping MP3 files. They would love to be able to play them somewhere else other than their computer. We've made a thing that makes this possible now. But I have to convince the world at large that this is worth making and selling, because I can't put it on a shelf somewhere if I don't have Best Buy convinced, for example, that this is an important thing to invest in. And the same thing with when, the company I was at, we acquired Replay TV to go up against TiVo. And this was a thing at the time, was like every single person who was able to set their DVR and record something and watch it later was blown away. But to convince somebody that they needed to like record their shows in the background on these DVRs and then later go back and watch them, and pausing live TV and all these other buzzwords that were kind of around that, it was hard for people to kind of be like, yeah, I don't know if I need that. Like, I feel like I need it. So you had all these data points for any of those kinds of products that are like really shift the curve. MP3 players, DVRs, smartphones, whatever it might be, that just bends the curve in a really dramatic way, is that the product you built is solving a real need. It's exciting for people to use it. It makes their life better and more fun and all these other things. And that, everything that suggests that that's the case. But to your point, the market conditions have to be right. You need to go out and make your own luck, right? Like that persistence part becomes really important, because it's like, I have to just keep knocking on every door. I got to knock on every media door. I got to knock on every retailer door. I got to knock on everywhere that it could matter, so that as I start to unlock those things and get some momentum, I can keep leaning into that. It's different if you have, if your customers are telling you, I don't know if this is working for me, like this didn't solve my problem, then maybe persistence in the marketplace is different. You need to have persistence with your customer voice and the product and get it right. But if you're at a point where like, I know I've got something special here, I need to get it out to the world. At that point, you have to just, you have to keep trying, because you've got the validation you need to say, I've got a lot of people who feel like my product and my solution really solves their problem. I need to do something about this. I can't just sit on it or give up.
That's such a great example. The MP3 player example is such a great example of what I think is also an incredibly common trap for any creator or builder. And I'll use that word to kind of catch somebody who's building software or hardware and technology, but also people who are like writing songs and painting and creating craft. This notion of, if my thing is just good enough, and I'm doing air quotes here on purpose, like if it is just of such a high quality that's enough, that if I just made it of such clear, demonstrable quality, the world will bend towards my offering. And what I've seen from the vantage point of working with creatives, a lot of musicians, a lot of people who view their vocation as somebody who does work in creative spaces, is that ends up being a trap to kind of hide from doing the hard work of showing up consistently. Meaning suddenly we find ourselves in this loop of like endlessly polishing a thing because we think the quality of said thing is going to be all the marketplace needs to bend their attention towards the thing. When in reality, it's like, I mean, how many publishing houses said no to J.K. Rowling and like the first, volume of Harry Potter, right? Like the number of people that have passed on quality work throughout the history of quality work being created it's infinite. I mean, there's a million stories. I mean, we were talking about this earlier, right? This kind of like the overnight success that was like 50 years in the making, right? Like, I talk about like Miles Davis sometimes with people, love Miles Davis. I'm a jazz fan across a lot of, other types of music, but like Kind of Blue, arguably one of the greatest jazz records in the history of jazz. People love to say how he tracked it in like 8 hours. That's true. But he also released like 50 albums before he did like Kind of Blue. And that kind of definition of like quality or something being like, that's all the work that the creative needs to do is go make a thing that's good enough and that's good enough for the world. And what you realize is the constant is not that at all. It's being able to actually don't use it as a crutch to hide and not ship and not get your work out into the world, and accept maybe going into it that you're going to have to keep showing up if you plan on having any kind of momentum to build people's attention, energy, get them to open their wallet, do whatever it is that you think they need to do or ought to do to help drive, your thing forward. It's going to take that kind of like commitment and acceptance of this is probably going to take me showing up over and over and over and over again over time.
When you think of organizations, most organizations are led by a discipline. So, for example, you might have an organization where your primary person in charge, let's call it the CEO, is finance person or an engineer or a salesperson or a marketing person or whatever, right? They tend to come from a discipline that's the lens that they view the world in. Now, most good leaders will have many different ways to observe things, but they're going to have a lane that they came out of that's most comfortable for them. Then that also translates down to the organization. And to me, this is also, there's a little bit of prescriptive stuff in here from a leadership perspective and maybe even team building, which is if you're going to go craft something that you aspire to be a hit, and we'll use air quotes for that maybe through the whole episode, but aspire to be a hit, all of those disciplines contribute something really useful to producing what ends up being the hit. Almost all engineers will be like, if I just build a great thing, it will succeed in the world. To your previous point, I made a thing, it's technically sound, the world should accept this and love it and cherish it, right? And every great marketing person will say, I could take anything you can build and make a great story about it and have people subscribe to that and get excited about it. So it's more important that we get the storytelling right, because that's going to push us into the stratosphere. And then you have the salesperson like, that's really cute, guys, that you think that. But if somebody doesn't go out here and actively put this in the marketplace to buy, it really doesn't make any difference what you guys do. You could have the greatest product and the greatest story, and if I have nowhere to buy it, it doesn't matter. And they're all right in so many ways, right? And this is where I think when I see products, and again, you use the term product to your point, it could be art, it could be, film, music, technology. When your product is too focused around any one of those things, you're going to get lost and you won't have a chance to catch up, because you will have either created a product without a customer base, or you created a customer base without a product in so many ways. And those two things will never line up. It'll always achieve some level of disappointment in the market.
If nobody knows anything, how should a builder or a leader approach decision making then?
Typically, when you're creating a product, you're either creating it as an outlet for yourself, like people who paint and just hang them in their own houses and nobody sees it but the people that come over, right? All the way to a sophisticated organization that's producing technology products to deliver to the marketplace. If you're trying to achieve commercial success with a thing, I have never met a successful person who didn't attribute their success to some level of luck, right? There's some lane of luck that applies to everything that you do. And you have to position yourself. You can create your own luck, right? By giving yourself as many opportunities as possible, which is true. Recognizing when maybe luck is in action is also another important thing, which is like a lucky thing just happened to our benefit. How do we make sure that we don't spoil this somehow?
Exactly. Having enough receptors out there in the world to detect when something might be breaking your way. That you implement. Those are questions for a team then, right? Like almost like scenarios you could run to a team as like, mock role-playing exercises. What are we going to do, guys, if our version of Kimmel, including our thing in the monologue, happens? Are we prepared to respond? What things do we need to shore up if and when that happens, so we can mobilize quickly, so that maybe we can capitalize to the degree that we're even able to on a moment like that? So maybe there's, some sort of edge to the frame that somebody might be able to, kind of take from this conversation as something you can do something with, is running those types of scenarios with your team, with yourself. If you were like a solo builder, solo entrepreneur, like, what do you do if you just kind of strike oil? Are you ready for that? What would you do? What are you prepared to put into the world? How are you prepared to respond? Those probably are worthwhile exercises, or muscles at least, to kind of start, stretching. In fact, stretching muscles is an interesting analogy, or one that gets stuck in my head when we talk about topics like this, because I think another thing that you and I have said before, again, through that lens of like, well, then what are the constants then? Like, what is a leader supposed to do? If we're collectively acknowledging that nobody knows anything, and we can be the smartest folks in the world, and we think we got product market fit and all this sort of stuff, but we still need a little bit of secret sauce, how are we supposed to make decisions? Is really what we're saying is, how good are you at being supple? How good are you at being flexible? Like, how plastic is your organization if suddenly you have to stretch a direction you weren't anticipating?
The part to remember is that if you do everything right and well, and everybody puts their best foot forward, everybody does the best that they possibly can, in almost all industries, the odds are still stacked against you, right? You probably aren't going to have the next unicorn company. You have to realize that if you aren't pliable, then you're almost planning to fail, right? Because you're like, I know that the odds are stacked against me to succeed, which means my journey is going to be very crooked, right? I will not head straight to point B from where I am right now. As my crooked journey kind of unfolds in front of me, I have to be ready to take a hard left or a hard right on occasion, but be disciplined enough to not chase every single thing that comes my way. And that's one of the hardest things. And we hear, business leaders all over the place talk about that. And certainly, creatives of all types, is this idea that I need to be focused enough to know what my purpose is, but I can't be so rigid as to almost guarantee my failure.
But just hearing you say, hey, it's going to be a crooked path, just reminds me of conversations that I have in my house, like my wife and I with our kids. So where our kids are in life is, my oldest is a senior in high school. So, I mean, we're staring all of the, what comes next, after high school, conversations right in the face. And my two other kiddos are middle school aged. And so they get to absorb a lot of these conversations, but it's still like top of mind. And I can't tell you how often we hear what they're bringing home from conversations with friends, from conversations with teachers or other people in their lives, coaches, mentors, whatever you want to do, talking about sort of like the path or the way. And it's very linear. It's very much like, and then it kind of goes like this, and then it kind of goes like this. And even with the best intentions, I think in mind, they're sort of laying what in my mind visually looks like a linear path to go walk. And they bump up against what I think they hear, my wife and I talk about constantly at home, which is, you've got to get really comfortable, kiddo, realizing that the way ahead for you is totally like a jungle gym. Like, it is going to be left, and it's going to be right, and it's going to be up. It's probably going to be downish. So what are we doing to help you develop muscles in moving across a jungle gym? Because that's probably what has to, go on next for you. And again, I realize it's like a bit of a departure, but it just reminds me that the fundamental skill set that we're talking about here, and at least what I'm hearing you describe, as part of what an organization, might find value in considering, is not only acknowledging, which by the way, I don't think this is the hard part. I think plenty of organizations sort of nod their head up and down at this one, like acknowledging like, oh yes, we have to be supple. We have to be able to pivot. We understand that that's important, but maybe the subtext, alongside of that or underneath that, and this is where I'm drawing on like this kind of riff about my kids, is giving people permission to like say that out loud, that it's okay to do that, by the way. Like there's a difference between, I know I should be a supple, flexible organization, and also relieving yourself of the mental stress of, and by the way, it is okay if and when a pivot happens. You don't need to feel like you've failed. You don't need to feel that all of that. In fact, now that I'm saying it out loud, I realize that it's like all of that sort of opportunity cost, or whatever you want to call it, like the project debt, the time you spent doing the thing, that it's not a waste. That even if it means you have to go another direction, that's okay. So like, let yourself off the hook. Maybe don't forgive yourself and pat yourself on the back for acknowledging that what the situation might require in this particular moment is an adjustment, is a tweak, to use your point, to be a little bit crooked right now and have to go to the left for a little bit. Because I feel like I've felt that on teams. I don't know if you have felt that before, but that energy of like, okay, I guess we are going to make this pivot, but boy, does that mean we blew it? Is everything that came before a total sunk cost?
It's simplistic, but it's a funny thing. If you talk about like being in a conference room with people or whatever, and you go, here's a whiteboard pen, go up on the whiteboard, like draw me out your high level roadmap for the next 5 years. First thing they draw, straight line. Right. And then they start putting hatch marks on it with all the milestones that they're going to hit on that straight line path. Yeah. And I think there is a lot that we put on ourselves of being like, I have a goal, and my goal, is to get to point B from where I am right now at point A. And all of us would agree that the best way to do that is to go straight right to that point. I don't think enough people go into that with their eyes open to the point of saying, but we know it's not going to be straight. This will not happen, right? Like we are drawing this as an aspirational goal to get to this point. However, probably by the second step of this journey, you are off the path, right? And we might not even end up exactly at point B, and we have to be willing to assess that. But too often when we kick things off, what do? We sit down and we say, we're trying to get here, and we think we're going to do it this way. And this is the amount of time we think it's going to take. And this is the amount of effort we think it's going to take. All right, break, team, let's go. And from the jump, you set the expectation that if we don't do it this way that we just talked about, then we've missed somehow. Like we've failed in some way. We've missed a target that we set for ourselves and all these other things. And that's fine. But if the team at a high level is aware that you're like, this journey will not be straight. The one thing we know is that this will not happen. We will not follow this line and check these milestones off as we go and then celebrate our victory at the end. This will not happen. Now, we want the journey to be as short as possible. We want to make as few mistakes as possible. But we also have to know that if we're going to do it right, we have to take a crooked path, because the things that we adjust to means that if we were to somehow get to the point that we drew on the whiteboard in a straight line, would have meant that at the very beginning, we knew everything we needed to know before we even got started. And that is not how this works, right? It is not. Nobody handed you a blueprint to a house and said, this is literally where everything goes. And this is the house we're going to build. And even to that analogy, how many people that have ever built a custom home or that have ever been involved in that process at the end ended up with exactly the thing that they were planning to start with? Like, it almost never, right? And yet somehow there's a team somewhere going like, all right, we're trying to get from point A to point B, and we're going to check off these things, and away we go. And the minute they hit some friction, they're like, oh, this is a setback, right? Like we've missed, this is a big miss and all these things. You're like, acknowledging up front that we knew that this wouldn't happen in the first place, I think empowers people. And to your point, you're giving people permission to say, this journey is going to be crooked, but we all need to move together, right? So if we need to go left, let's all go left. That's good. We don't all head different directions constantly. We all still need to get to the journey, the end of the journey together. But if we don't acknowledge the fact that we do not have a perfect blueprint for how to do this right now, then this journey will not be linear, nor should anyone expect it to be. So the one thing it's not going to be is a linear path to success.
Yeah. And so if we are thinking in the context of this conversation, how would we be hopefully helping somebody who's either in a leadership position, who's shaping these types of dynamics for their team, or they are a party of one and they're building for themselves or creating for themselves, and in which case it's the same exercise, but you got to kind of have the self-talk, the conversation for yourself about this. I can clearly recall being in those meetings where somebody's like, yes, we're trying to go from here to here, and it is a straight line. But what is often missing in those conversations is a leader or a group of leaders or that person in their own head able to saliently have that conversation with themselves, giving themselves or the room permission and the transparency to go, this is a visual aid, because what will almost certainly happen is we will deviate from this straight line. And when that happens, not if that happens, but when that happens, that's okay. That the code we wrote to get us here is not throwaway. It's not the number of engineers that I've had to, we hate doing it's not throwaway work or sunk costs or whatever other label we want to put on it. It's another way to think of it is like, look, do you want to accept as a builder sort of this gift of all of the effort and energy that your past self put into a thing? Do you want to accept that to do something with it going forward or not? You don't have to. But don't let it sink you and don't let it break your heart or don't get so sunk on the idea of sunk costs that it prevents you from showing up the next day to keep working. Because that's really what we're saying here, is that there's some degree of commitment to the process that people who are working, trying to bring work or ideas into the world have to acknowledge that that's what they're signing up for. It's not the overnight hit, right? It's the overnight success that was 50 years in the making. Simultaneously, leadership is going to be about giving people the permission and the air cover to embrace that it's going to be a jungle gym, that the road will be crooked. And ideally, you got people in positions of leadership that are helping teams feel like that's safe and that that's okay. And that the work that they've done isn't throwaway work and it's not a sunk cost and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's really hard, because what it makes me think of is how difficult it must be for a leader or a group of leaders to admit that they don't know everything without losing credibility. Right? Like, and then I feel like that's something to then sit with if you're leading a team or an organization. How do you do that then and maintain your credibility as the person who should be, making decisions?
There's an argument, if you have enough talented people with some semblance of a plan, that they can get the job done. And especially if you have A talent across the board, away you go. Maybe. But then there's another one which says a team with the right role players and the right level of transparency and the right level of communication and collaboration, and everybody understand what they're supposed to do and how they can move together as a unit, can defeat most teams that built nothing but of A players. And I use the defeat in kind of like the sports term, right? Which is like, 2004 Pistons beating the Lakers is not because, the Lakers were stacked with talent, but they didn't really have a team. They had Shaq and Kobe and some role players, and that should have been enough, right? And the team that knew what everybody's role was, what the goal was, what the plan was, and everything else rose up and beat them. And I think that comes back a little bit to what you're talking about there, which is that the plan is to solve a problem. And as long as everybody understands the problem that they're trying to solve and who they're trying to solve it for, it can really dictate that journey, right? We are taking a left because of this. This is something we've learned. We have new information that we did not have when we started this process. And the information that we have is greatly connected to the problem we're trying to solve and the people we're trying to solve it for. And so there's justification to take the left. It's not because there's a shiny new thing. It's not because somebody just announced that NFT is going to be the hottest thing in the world. It's not because, our CEO talked to 2 high school kids yesterday and has a whole new epiphany on things, right? It's not that. It's that we all have an intimate knowledge of the person that we're trying to solve a problem for, and that we're making decisions based on that as a team. And that we know that when we start the project, we know as much as we can about the problem we're solving and the people we're solving it for. But new information is going to come at us fast. And we're going to have to rapidly understand, does this affect the person that I'm solving the problem for, or does it affect the solution to that problem in some way? And if so, we might need to pivot in some particular direction. And that there's alignment on the team as to why. That's a really important one. Teams that are built in silos that are kind of randomly yanked to the left typically resist because they don't understand why we're doing it. Like, why did we all of a sudden just decide we're going to go this other direction today? And I'm frustrated because I don't understand it. I'm frustrated because it means I have to do, this throwaway work, or however else I might want to classify it, is I'm going to perceive it to be throwaway work if I didn't understand why I'm supposed to be doing it in the first place. If your team trusts each other and they understand the vision and they understand the problem that they're solving and the people that they're solving it for, and those conversations are driving the deviations from that straight line, everybody levels up. Like, in my experience, that's a team that wins.
If nobody knows anything about how to make something that's a hit or make something great or whatever, if nobody knows anything, then what the hell am I supposed to do? Like, what, as a builder, we've said you're signing up for being persistent. You have to. Babe Ruth, 40 some odd home runs. Aaron Judge, 40. They took more swings. Babe Ruth, right, was strikeout king the year he broke the home run record because he took more swings. So there's something to be said for just showing up and taking more swings. There's also something to be said for setting the groundwork up front for embracing a non-linear path to how you're going to get to where you're going to go with yourself or your team. And that's the function of leadership, to say, yep, we drew the straight line on the whiteboard, but we're saying publicly it's not going to be straight to everybody. And by the way, that's okay. And the things that we produce along the way, it's not throwaway work. Let's not beat ourselves up emotionally. Let's not get down about what we've produced. We have a choice on whether or not we want to accept those gifts from our past self for producing this work, whether or not we want to use it going forward. That's up to us, and that's all right. That's the job. And then I think what you just said right there is the role that a team of people have when they have shared vision and a shared mandate and a shared mission, and they have a crisp, or as crisp as it can be at any given moment, understanding of who are they seeking to serve, and what needs are they fulfilling, what desires are they fulfilling, what pain do they relieve, all that sort of stuff. If that is a shared understanding of the mission and the vision, that's unbelievably valuable. And that's when we get into areas like culture and team and what that really means. And while those instruments of shaping that are almost certainly going to vary across organizations, across companies, across teams, and different groups of people, different styles of people, something you said in there just reminded me, like, oh, maybe there's a third thing in there that is a constant, maybe one of these other pillars, which is the role of leadership in acknowledging for their team that no matter what the incremental decision might be, or the tweak or the pivot, that we talk a lot about who we are seeking to serve and why we are doing that. And we just do that over and over and over and over again. So if you are an engineer at this level, if you are a junior level person on part of the marketing team who deals with, AdsWiz or whatever, you don't need to know the machinations, perhaps you don't even want to know all of the incremental decisions that are being made at some other areas of the business. But it seems like what you're saying is you can sort of place a healthy bet that your output, that the quality of work, that the likelihood that what you're building may quote unquote work will go up if the leader has set an expectation out of the gates that the core guiding principle of everything we do when we clock in and our work together is to serve these types of people who have these types of problems, who are looking for this type of joy or relief from pain with these desires. That's the constant. And I certainly know that that is incredibly easy to eject from almost any team conversation all the time for a whole bunch of reasons. But maybe that's another one of those pillars for, well, how should I, what am I supposed to do then if nobody knows anything and do work? We're saying, well, accept the fact that if you invest in culture, a culture of shared mission and shared vision, that's probably going to up the odds that whatever you're working on might have a greater chance of actually sort of landing.
I think that key part of that is, you call it your North Star or whatever, is the idea that we make decisions with purpose for our customers who have these needs, right? And that drives those decisions. And when those conversations are collaborative, and when everybody's really transparent about what they're working through on that, is that it's a lot less likely to have well, that's just your opinion, man. That can't, you can't get, Lebowski'd in a meeting when you're sitting there and someone's just throw something crazy out from left field. Like, what we should do this thing. I heard on, this TED talk that you got to do this or whatever. And they're like, okay, but why? Why would we do that? And who are we doing this for? And it's tough because not all teams are made up of individuals who would embrace that kind of behavior. But I would encourage anybody out there to do that. If your team is even sometimes even has one, but let alone many, especially the leader, who are willing to disrupt the progress of the thing on a whim without a whole lot of justification, all you're going to do is erode the confidence in what everybody thinks they're doing in the first place. And when you have alignment there, when you trust the person sitting to your left and sitting to your right in those rooms, you're going to just find a way to be great, right? Like this just happens. And it's when we don't trust each other and we don't communicate and we don't understand our customers and it's just every opinion in the room for themselves. Yeah, you're going to have a crooked path, but it will not go anywhere. Like it's going to head off in multiple directions at the same time. And that's when you've got almost an irreparable situation in a lot of places, which is like, there is no way other than just an absolute Hail Mary, completely blind luck works your way, which I'll, as a quick tangent, is one of the worst things that can happen to an organization is that you have wild success off of horrible behavior, because then you do go to the very beginning of the pod. You're like, all right, let's reverse engineer this. The thing that worked in the past was this exact thing. And let me tell you, that is the recipe for success. I have heard that. I cannot tell you how many CEOs I've heard go to a new organization and the first words out of their mouth is, what we did at the last thing when we had the success was this. So we should all try and do that. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, man. I'm glad you bought the winning Powerball numbers, but it turns out that just picking all your relatives' birthdays is actually not the recipe to win Powerball. That was your lucky moment.
If I have to try to play an empathy card there, I understand it. I understand that posture, because that's operating from a very human position of that's what our brains are good at, is sort of pattern recognition. I did like making order when there is no order, trying to sort of sort things into categories and sort and label and have these sort of predefined things. So when you have something that feels on the other end, because you've had a taste, you've had that little sample, quick hit taste of success, a little bit of like the sizzle, it gets really easy to be like, oh, that's the recipe then. That's the recipe. That's all you got to do. And so maybe something else that's worth a call it is like, just acknowledge that that's probably a trap. And if you feel yourself doing that, it's probably worth going, well, maybe I should just sit with that before I speak that out loud, and maybe just sit with that for a second and challenge it and poke at it.
The nice thing is when you have thoughts like that, right? Like, well, before this worked at my last place or my last project or my last thing, or yeah, I did hear something today that sounds pretty cool. Maybe we should do that. Like those kinds of thoughts, those very disruptive thoughts when you're trying to accomplish something. The thing to do there is then stack that up against the things we've just been talking about, which is like, okay, does this affect my customer exactly? Does this contribute to the solution to that problem that they were so acute to them that we started building this thing in the first place? If I can run a lens like that and say, you know what? Yes, actually, a thing I did previously actually stacks up really nicely with what we're doing here. I want to bring that to the team and let them react to that. Sure, that can be a really healthy thing. It's when you don't have the capacity to say, I need to put some kind of a validation around this thought I have, because otherwise it's chaos, right? Of me just being like, I'm going to inject a wildly disrupting thing into this process because I have more influence or power than somebody else at the table. And now that's just the way it's got to be because I said so. And that's the fastest way to get your lines going every direction. And you got some people on this path and some people on this path. And now point B isn't even in sight anymore. We don't even know where it is.
And boy, does that strike a chord for me and for a wide variety of reasons, right? But to be in that position where you know that, the one at the front of the ship who's steering the thing, that a primary motivator is likely none of those things. Is likely, everything to do with making sure that that individual or that group of people feel like they are demonstrating that they can wear the uniform of leader the way that they think they're supposed to wear the uniform, which is really just, more about how do I posture, how do I present as the person or the team who makes the decisions. And that is the real motivator for me wanting to come, to the table here with my mandates and my proclamations of whatever that might be, which to your point leaves the most mission critical piece of this off the table, which is who here amongst us has the best understanding of who our customers are, who the people we seek to serve really are, what they struggle with, what they care about, what transformation matters to them, what pain they're trying to remove. Who has that information? And can we go run up everything we just talked about whatever this pivot might be that we're considering, if that's what we're doing, or perhaps considering continuing to do exactly the same thing we've always done, how prepared are we to really run all of that up against that information about the people we seek to serve, and stress test that theory that this stuff will hold water?
If I launch a product and people love it, but not enough people love it, did I fail, or did I just was my target wrong? Or like my circle, I drew the wrong circle around the wrong things, or maybe the problem wasn't big enough in the first place. There's no person who's going to wander into a room at the beginning of some project and say, this is absolutely the path to success. This is what we're going to do. It's really hey, as a team, can we all agree that these are the people with the problems that we're trying to solve, and we're somehow uniquely positioned to solve this? Great. Let's draw it up and let's figure out a path forward as a group. And then let's all make sure that whatever this wild ride that we're about to be on, that we stay on the route together, and that we all move through it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That I'm going to create the conditions amongst this group of people, or for me, the individual creator and builder, I'm going to create the conditions for people to understand that not only is it okay for new ideas to come in, for new flashes of inspiration, not only is that okay, it's expected. Like you said earlier, new information is going to come at us constantly, and it's going to be likely a combination of things we learn because we're showing up every day trying to put things into the world for people to react to. So we're learning, we're measuring, we're gathering things, but also we're going to sit around in some meeting, or we're going to wake up at 3 a.m. with some idea from that TED talk we watched or something, and it's going to be like, oh, what is that? Like, that is going to happen. So not only one, is that okay? And I, as a leader, I'm willing to invest in creating the conditions for these things to happen because I think there's value there. It's okay for that to happen. It's expected that it's going to happen. But the exercise then becomes to take all that and run it up against those core principles of who our customer is, how crisply we understand what our mission is and what our vision is for how we serve them. And that's the job with all of that new information. And ultimately, whatever drops out the bottom of that might, maybe not, but maybe results in a left turn, a right turn, or whatever the metaphor is.
Yeah. And I think maybe the final piece to that is, if you do that, what you're really trying to do in a lot of ways is give yourselves as many opportunities to be lucky as possible, right? Because what you don't want to do is be like, all right, I'm going to build this thing in a black box and I'm going to tell no one about it. And then on media launch day, we will have the greatest success of our lives. And you're giving yourself one chance to be lucky, basically, by doing that. And so maximizing the opportunity to be lucky, it sounds somewhat whimsical, right? Which is like, oh, I'm going to somehow bet on luck. Well, you have to increase your odds in some way. And in doing that is find that new information, insert it into the process when it makes sense, make sure everybody stays on the same page. Give yourself opportunities at validation, like figure out what constitutes success and like, how do we incrementally go touch that? Be willing to be persistent. If luck didn't work the first 10 times, if I struck out my first 6 times up at the bat and I'm like, that's it, I'm done with baseball forever, right? I went 0 for 6, my career's over. It's crazy. No one would think about that. No one would think like, oh, Barry Bonds, he would have been awesome, except after his 6th at bat, after striking out, he just gave up baseball entirely, and then that was it. So at some level, everyone has to be bought into the fact of like, we're so convinced that this is the team that's going to win. This is the idea that's going to get us there. We're solving the right problem for the right people. We have to keep going up to bat. We have to keep doing it because we know we're going to sort this out. And that, to continue, the baseball analogy, the greatest baseball players in the world fail 65% of the time at the plate. The world, like the greatest ever to have ever lived, fail 65% of the time they try. And we hold them to the highest regard. They're in the Hall of Fame, the most amazing, people at this task that there ever was. And we have to acknowledge that in our own lives, which is, I'm not going up there to hit a meatball, right? Like somebody's trying to strike me out every single time. And so the fact that I did strike out is okay. It's an expected outcome, right? Like if some, like we watch these box scores and we track all these things and we're all amazed by the numbers and all this other stuff. And in almost every sport, all of us follow as an analogy, the most common outcome is some level of failure. Is the most common outcome in sports, right? Is to not succeed. And yet we go into business being like, all right, we have a product definition document, and a project manager put a really, really slick schedule together. The engineers they seem okay with it from what we can tell. The marketing guys seem pretty jazzed about it. Yeah, this is just a bona fide hit. There's just no way that
we can point to
yeah
3 other things that are similar that have worked, right?
Yeah.
Like we're playing the right thing.
Yeah, we saw these Apple guys, they did it. I mean, there's no reason why we can't do it. You know what I mean? Whatever.
That's exactly
It's the most wild
That's
thing.
right.
In some ways, you have to respect the optimism, but we all have to really be, if we all sit down and know this isn't the map that we just drew on the board, that's not what we're going to do, right? The path we're going to take to get there, we don't know what that's going to be. Like the magic that's going to unlock this thing at the end of the day, we're not really sure what that's going to be either. But what we do know is we have a lot of people who have a very specific problem that we are uniquely equipped to solve, and that we have enough validation to say that we're doing it right, that everybody needs to just push as hard as they can to get us there. And when you have that, the team pushes, right? When they're like, well, no, we have a success. We've shown this movie trailer to 10,000 people now, and we're getting standing ovations, and people are jumping up and down, and they're so excited and all this stuff. The fact that a studio won't buy this is absolutely insane. We are going to solve this problem, right? Like we are going to get ourselves to where we need to be, because everything tells us, all the signals tell us we got here to the place we were trying to go, and that was the place we want to be in the first place. And that's how your hit gets made. But you don't start and be like, oh yeah, when we're done with this, definite hit. There's just no chance of failure whatsoever.
That's it. I think that's it exactly. We'll save this for another show, another episode, another time. I mean, me in baseball, I think I can make an analogy out of baseball for every single thing in life. I love it too much, but 100% agree. A lot of what we're talking about here is permission for ourselves, permission for our teams to be okay with not only the expected outcomes of things not working. And in fact, in many circles, people would argue that that is the very definition of art, by the way, is doing work that might not work and doing it consistently. But that's the key, I think, for anybody who's out there trying to build, for anybody who's out there trying to navigate how they bring great ideas or great work or great art into the world when the context is, hey, nobody really knows anything, is that commitment to persist, that commitment to be willing to show up tomorrow, then to be able to leave yourself or your team with enough gas in the tank because they are fulfilled, they have clear eyes for the mission, for the vision. It leaves people with enough juice, enough gas in the tank to show up the next day, right? And I think maybe that's what I'm hearing in your point here at the end. Is like, we know if we can do these things, we're the right group to be trying to solve this type of problem. It might not happen today. It might not happen tomorrow. But there's enough fuel for us to come back tomorrow and come back the day after that and come back the day after that. And it's almost like, look out. If you give us enough runway, we're going to get there. And I would place a bet that that's actually an enormous part of the tried and true recipe for how you're going to make a hit in a world where nobody knows anything.
If you really wanted to reverse engineer a hit, those ingredients would be common threads, right? Those would be things about, these pieces are just always present in a hit. That doesn't mean that you can photocopy it and cut and paste it into some other solution and be like, this definitely works now. We just grab the same people and we'll just do a different problem. Like, that doesn't always work either. But you have to make sure that those pieces are there, and that when you put those combination of elements together, you create opportunities for luck and you maximize your chance at a hit.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. I think that's the show. Well said. I don't have anything else to book in that with. This is Slackers. I'm Jaime.
I'm Jonathan.
We appreciate you being here. Check out the show notes for links to both of our work. Drop us a note. Say hello. We love it when people say hi. Send us a question. Don't be a stranger. Thank you for listening. This is Slackers. We'll see you next time.